Today I'm going to talk about the university systems. Now, the reason this is relevant came up when I was talking about St. Brigid, because from the universities there are some professors in various different departments who cast doubts upon the lives of the saints, and in all different universities for all different saints, of course, not just for the lives of the saints, but also for Christianity in general. So I did say in that video that I was planning on making a video like this eventually, so I've decided to do that today. So the first thing to look at in regards to why these universities often have a anti-Christian and anti-Orthodox Christian angle to them goes back to their origin. Now, I don't know so much about the very first universities, but regardless, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were major changes in the education system. Obviously, one of those things being that it became compulsory for the entire society. This education system, as we still know it today, goes back to a Prussian model for education that was designed from its outset to try to undermine the democratic movement in the country. This Prussian model was then moved over to the United States, funded especially by the Rockefeller and Carnegie family, and again with that same intention. Prior to that, the United States had a much more decentralized education system, and so these very wealthy families didn't like that. They wanted to control what the citizens of the country were thinking and their understanding of the world. And so obviously, if you have this system that you're in control of, you can dictate what every or nearly every single child is going to be taught from a young age, or at least have a massive degree of control over that. So it's obvious why they would be interested in this kind of thing. It was successful from their perspective in the United States, and then moved over into Europe, and going on until today, we see efforts to bring this educational model to Africa, to Asia, and it's all in the name of something charitable, in the name of education. Like, who would not want people to be educated is the way they make it seem, as if this model is the only model that exists, and really this bad intention has been behind it since its origin. Some of the useful resources for this, because you can go into it in much more depth by watching this documentary, How Big Oil Conquered the World, and also reading a book by John Taylor Gatto called Weapons of Mass Instruction, especially chapter 1, which is called Everything You Know About Schools is Wrong. That's especially that chapter is very important in this, and also a short book by C.S. Lewis called The Abolition of Man. Those are all very useful resources. In the universities, there are two logical fallacies that are the most common and important to know. That these fallacies mean that a great deal of the supposed knowledge from the universities is based on this, which is appeal to authority, which would be in the case of when someone becomes a professor of some reputation, or because he belongs to so and so a university that's an esteemed university. Well, if he says something without really backing that with any strong evidence or a coherent argument, but he says something, then it's completely encouraged for all the universities to quote that person as an authority, and that in itself is evidence enough. and this is a huge thing in the universities, and so really, false opinions can just pile on top of each other when people are just appealing to authority in this way. And similarly, an appeal to consensus, like these sorts of statements. All scientists agree, all historians agree, this is an appeal to consensus, and so sometimes appeal to authority in regards to a professor at a famous university, and sometimes appeal to consensus as all the universities agree with this. And as I said, because the universities are so controlled by these big financial powers, of course there's consensuses across the universities because they're owned by all the same people, so it's very easy to create that. Especially another thing that allows for these logical fallacies is the lack of understanding of paradigms. Most of the people in the university believe that they don't have a paradigm, that they are just looking at the facts. This is a big thing that you'll find in atheists saying this more openly, but actually in all kinds of people. They think that there's a term for this, myth of neutrality, that they have some sort of special neutral position, that they are just looking at the facts in some sort of clear light that other people are not, by believing something, like, for example, by being an Orthodox Christian, that is like a distorting prism when observing some fact in the world, whereas their secularism, their atheism, or whatever it is, their nihilism, is in some way removing any kind of distorting filter. But it's called, this term, the myth of neutrality, is because nobody has that. Everyone has a paradigm. Everyone has a web of beliefs by which they look at any new fact, and nobody has a neutral position. And that doesn't lead to relativism, because the point from the Orthodox perspective would be everyone has a paradigm, but our paradigm is the correct one. Now, in this way, we can look at our paradigm and pose questions to our paradigm, and ultimately have a paradigm that we can explain on various different levels, theologically, metaphysically, in all these different ways. So the point of why this is important is that from the university perspective, or the perspective of many of these university professors, they don't even know what this is at all. So often, if their paradigm is analysed, something that they have never done, it's discovered very quickly that their paradigm makes no sense. In the obvious case of this type of secular materialist who says, I don't believe in anything that's not physical, and that's the logical thing to think. It's incredible that they haven't seen the contradiction, in that they think that their position is logical, but logic is not a physical object. So in this way, by not knowing what a paradigm is, believing in the myth of neutrality obviously exposes a person to have a completely incomprehensible and foolish paradigm. And obviously, if your paradigm is wrong, your ability to analyze any fact is also going to lead to an incorrect interpretation. Also related to that, in the university system, is as you go from bachelor's to master's to PhD, you become increasingly specialized. A top professor has an incredibly narrow speciality. So this is why, for example, as I was talking about paradigms, like not everyone has to be an expert in philosophy. I don't consider myself to be an expert in philosophy, but I do know some of these basic ideas. Now, many of these university professors, they're so specialist in one area that if you pointed out, this about the paradigms, about the myth of neutrality, they would say, whoa, 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 that's not my expertise, so I don't know about that, I don't need to know about that, it's irrelevant to me and my subject. Whereas, of course, it's not irrelevant because it will lead you to different interpretations in that field that is his speciality. It's fine to have a speciality, but the university system encourages you, you have a degree in one thing, not in anything else. And even within that subject, narrower, 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 until someone is an expert in something so specific that even that thing that they are an expert in, their ability to interpret it becomes compromised because they don't understand that thing in its wider context. Um, Also, in the universities, especially more so in the students, it's very well known and like a joke about the immorality that's so common. Obviously not every student is like this. Some universities are worse than others, but drunkenness and promiscuity amongst university students is something commonly known. And the point of that is that it doesn't imply a serious pursuit of knowledge. And I'm going to get to other aspects of immorality and the idea that someone's morality can actually alter their ability to interpret the world. Whenever we consider that amongst the students, amongst the teachers or the professors, they can be influenced so much by money, the desire for a reputation, which can be found by saying something controversial, saying something unprecedented, even if it's not true. Obviously, their desire to be promoted to a higher position at the university, just to become notorious as a exciting professor, an interesting professor, because someone who maybe has a balanced, nuanced view might be considered boring, whereas someone who says something that's completely insane and totally untrue can draw attention to himself. And obviously, in an institution that has per guiding principles, that can help them in these ways. So some of these things have already been touched on, but really all of these will fall into these categories in Orthodox Christianity that are known as the eight passions: pride, gluttony, lust, avarice, sloth, despondency, vainglory, and anger. And there's an understanding in Orthodoxy that these things really do distort our ability to understand the world. And it was for this reason that the real centers of knowledge in an Orthodox Christian society were the monasteries, because the monks were especially at war with these passions. Clearing themselves from these passions, they could then interpret this knowledge better. And so, for all of these reasons, in conclusion, I would say that the universities are not really great centers of scholarship. That there's not really a serious pursuit of truth there in these institutions at all, and this is in a very stark contrast to the levels of scholarship and sanctity in the early Irish Christian monasteries. This is something I come across so much in the research that I'm doing in this area, and that's why while looking at the lives of the saints, I do not consider very highly the views of these people at the universities, and I encourage the Orthodox Christians listening to this not to as well. Obviously, someone at university might actually have a good argument or something interesting to present, but just like anyone else, they have to do this. As I mentioned in the video, the appeal to authority, the appeal to consensus is a logical fallacy, so that's the important thing, not to be swayed to their claims to authority and consensus.